My name is Ann Wajda, and this is my oral presentation for First Year Writing 100. This presentation will mainly focus on the information that I found from researching the theme of Black bodies from Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Choosing this theme meant taking a more in-depth look into the news stories that Coates refers to in his novel, as well as a more in-depth look as to what it means to be a Black man in America today. The questions that I used to guide my research journey were: what is the discussion involving police violence and the Black male in the United States? What were the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Eric Gardner, Prince Jones, and Mike Brown? And finally, what did Coates say in Between the World and Me about this phenomenon? The first group of scholars whom I discovered in my research were Al Baker, J. David Goodman, and Benjamin Mueller. The three collectively wrote the New York Times article Beyond the Chokehold: The Path to Eric Gardner's Death. This article not only goes fully into detail from multiple points of view what happened on the day of Gardner's death, but it also goes into detail about his life, his family, and the life of the officer who killed him. I chose this article by these group of scholars because their ideas and the amount of information that they had gathered on Eric Gardner's death allowed the reader to fully understand what led up to and ultimately caused the death of Eric Gardner. My next group of scholars are two women by the names of Danielle Allen and Kathy Cohen. They are the co-authors of an article entitled "The New Civil Rights Movement Doesn't Need an MLK." In this article, the authors express that many movements, such as the Black Lives Matter movement, have come into existence as a result of police brutality. The main point that the co-authors were attempting to make in this article is that there is now an open communication around the country focusing specifically on police violence and its direct effect on Black men in America. This article was beneficial to my research because it fully demonstrated the conversation that people around the country are having on police brutality, as well as demonstrating what different organizations are willing to do to achieve true equality. My last scholar is Ta-Nehisi Coates, or more specifically an interview that he did with NPR. In this interview, Coates elaborates more on different themes from Between the World and Me, more specifically on the theme of police brutality. This is a clip from that interview where he elaborates further on the death of Prince Jones.
That when I ran it through my mind is this: the basic report from the officer was that Prince had attempted to back up his Jeep several times and ram the car that the officer was driving. So he had to kill him. He had to shoot him because his life was in danger. But I tried to imagine myself in Prince's shoes. The officer who was tracking him was not in a normal police cruiser. The officer was not in uniform. The officer, in fact, testified that he pulled out his gun, said police, but never showed Prince his badge. The officer was dressed in an undercover disguise like he was supposed to be a drug dealer. And, this is how insidious it gets. I have to imagine myself followed from the suburbs of Maryland through D.C., out into Virginia, realizing at some point that I'm being followed, not having any idea that this is a cop. And then having somebody pull a gun out on me and knowing that I'm near my fiance's house. So it always seemed to me perfectly logical, that Prince perceived that he was under threat.
Was this ever investigated?
Yes, it was. Nothing came of it. It was investigated by the prosecutor's office out in Fairfax, Virginia, I believe, and nothing ever came of it. There was an internal investigation by the Prince George's County Police Department. The officer was not punished. There was a civil suit eventually where the officer and the police department was found liable. But when I was checking on this, the officer was not suspended. He had not been punished. He had been previously found to have lied during another case, and the lie was, so bad that the prosecutor's office actually had to throw out every, case in which this officer had testified. The Prince George's County Police Department was at that time under federal consent decree. They were being investigated. The Washington Post did a series of investigative articles on the Prince George's County Police Department around that time, around 2001, 2002, and found that they were more likely than any other police department in the country to fire their guns.
In this interview, Coates not only gives us a more in-depth look into the life and death of Prince Jones, but he also discusses in detail police brutality, both in instances in the media and instances in his own personal life. One thing I learned from my research is truly how similar the stories of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, and Prince Jones are. In each case, it was an unarmed black man who was harassed previously, and each of them lost their lives to the hands of a police officer. Eric Gardner was killed when a police officer put him into an illegal chokehold. Michael Brown was killed when a police officer shot him. Prince Jones was killed when a police officer shot him. In every case, each of the officers who were responsible for each man's death were not held accountable for their actions. It is this reason, oftentimes, that movements get started in the first place. Because here you have 3 unarmed men who were killed by the police, and yet the police don't have to answer for the lives that they took. Because the protection of black bodies is such a large topic, I obviously could not get to everything that topic includes. However, if somebody were to pick up where I left off, I did have some questions where they could pick up from. 1. Stakeholders. What are the characteristics of those police officers who have killed unarmed black men? Are there any similarities among those people? Number 2. Timeline. How has the amount of killings by police changed since 2000? Number 3. Function. What role does technology, especially social media and video recording, have in the accountability of police officers today? I think that these 3 questions can show more of why police seem to be killing black men and why they seem to be getting away with it as much as they do. Thank you for listening to my presentation.